Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the next episode of Through Thick and Thin. And I have a special guest here, Megan McMurdy. So she is a LCPC, so she's a counselor in Maryland, and an LCPAT, which is licensed art therapist in Maryland as well, who works at a community clinic and is in private practice part-time. So one of fellow clinicians and therapists and art therapists, so I'm really happy to have her on today, be here. Yay. So I usually just say how we know each other, and Megan and I went to the same graduate program at George Washington. Yeah, so I know it's something we've been pretty vocal about through our social media platforms, and just something we've kind of chatted about very briefly. So I thought she'd be a good person to bring on today. So normally we start out with just seeing what is your personal history with diet culture and disordered eating for those who are listening or watching who don't know you.
I think a few years ago, if you would have asked me that question, I would have been like, oh, it started, my personal history with it started in middle school because that's when I got diagnosed. But you learn, you go through treatment and stuff, you kind of realize, oh, wow, this started way, way before, right? The official diagnosis, probably just, self-awareness and consciousness, there's constant media being at people. And I think especially growing up in the late 90s, early 2000s, if it was the adult women in my life kind of talking about the special K diet or the Atkins diet, or, making comments on their bodies. And at some point, you start to think, oh, this is what I do. This is what's normal. It really manifested for me, eating disorder this is probably when it really took off. Really restrictive, lots of exercise. And then I was diagnosed with bulimia in 8th grade. So that's where it started. And there it's been on and off therapy and, making it part of what's important to my personal life and my professional life.
And, now that you, I guess, are young adulthood, entering, older, still young middle adulthood, I guess you could say. How would you say that has progressed for you or shifted over time from that 7th, 8th grade diagnosis to now?
I think a pivotal point for me in getting help was that I hey, I think something's going on. I don't think this is normal. And she was completely on board, took me to my primary care. That's what she needed to do. And awful experience. And it's one of those things that replays in my head where said, well, she's not skinny enough to have an eating disorder. Yeah. So I'm gonna get emotional, but I will forever be so grateful for my mom for just being she's telling me she has a problem. I didn't care, give me the referral. So
good for her.
Yeah, for real. So she was for me at the beginning stages. Yeah, so it started and going and getting comfortable with therapy. And been such an off and on. There are months that are harder, there are days that are harder. I think after that, high school was okay for a while. Got in, was doing a lot of the work. And at George Washington was, really saying, hey, if you're gonna be a therapist, you should really have a therapist, right? And so I started seeing a therapist more regular for a few years, and now I'm with my current therapist who I see every week.
And I think two things that came up for me when you were sharing. One, unfortunately, the experience you had with physicians, I feel is a common occurrence, not only one that I hear with my teenage clients who are kind of more at their early stages, and just the horror stories I have heard from that. And then also personal experience as an adult. I remember I went to a doctor and I was looking for medication, like psychiatric medication, I wanted to adjust what I was taking to help with some of almost like obsessive thoughts regarding like food and things like that. And the doctor was like, oh, well, like you're not fat, so like I don't know why you're obsessing about these things. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll just go to someone else because we're obviously not on the same page. But like I said, like I was already in the middle of doing the work and established. Like I can't imagine somebody saying that to a 12 or 13-year-old or a parent who like really doesn't know, and they're like, oh, like maybe it isn't as severe as you think it is. And the second part of like what you shared of how this, like, yes, we are recovering. I say like we are always recovering because there's different points in our lives that trigger different things, but it's like this is a long journey, and for someone who could get help then and then potentially be dismissed, and that's just very frustrating to me. So I'm really happy your mom was a huge advocate for you,
because it could have very different route at that point. And it is because I think society, and especially medical practices, like the fat phobia is just so ingrained, and it's so frustrating. And with
the BMI.
Oh yeah.
the weight things with weight, and even I have a hard time because like obviously I work with this population, and it'll be like very aware or apparent in the client's chart that they've had a history of an eating disorder, and then someone doesn't see it, and like a nurse or one of the doctors will like say the weight out loud to my patient or to my client who's their patient, and then they come into me like cry. It's a whole thing, and I'm just like, why are we not more like informed and aware? So it's very frustrating when obviously we should be on the same team, but sometimes I feel like we're working against it.
I still, to this day, when I walk in, I'm like to a doctor's office, I'm like, hey, in recovery, don't want to know, I'm gonna turn around. And people are super receptive to it. And actually recently, which is crazy because I've been doing it for years, but I was so appreciative to this I believe I think she was a nurse or a med tech. She said, well, just so you know, like if you go into your my chart, just be aware, like if you go to the summary page, it's probably going to say it there, so don't look at that either. And that, I was like, wow, like that, to me, that was so just thoughtful, because I have accidentally done that before at the very beginning when I didn't know and I was looking for like lab results or whatever. And obviously, sometimes it's upsetting. It's not, it just depends on where you're at. But I thanked her. I was like, you know what, you're the first person that's ever mentioned that. And I think that's really awesome, because like I wouldn't have thought of that so on the other side of the brain, like I'm not thinking of everything that's in their chart. So I was really grateful. So I thought that was awesome. I was like,
yes, for sure. So I mean, like I know you mentioned a little bit earlier, like as being a part of the program NGW, they were very, very much a big supporter of our own personal therapy. But I'm wondering, as a counselor and a therapist, like how do you feel like that has impacted your recovery with your eating disorder?
Yeah, I think,
if it has at all.
Definitely. I think it encourages me to just keep healing. And I think a big part for me was I had coming into from undergrad to grad school, I had a lot of the behaviors like under control and like not doing on them, not acting on them. But I still had a lot of the thought, probably core beliefs there that I wasn't really moving through or working on completely. So I think through grad school, the work that we did there and what we learned, like it helped kind of just also open my eyes to like, oh, these are some pieces that I haven't quite touched on yet that I should probably touch on with my therapist, because it's a little deeper than what I was comfortable keeping. It got into like a comfortable point where things felt manageable, right? And I was like, okay, I think now it's time to dig a little deeper. And so with school and learning all of those different things, it was like, this is important.
And what I feel like I've experienced personally what I talk to a lot of my clients about. It's like we can advocate for other people, but then we still have these rules for ourselves and we hold ourselves to a different standard where it's like, oh yeah, intuitive eating and, like bashing diet culture and all these things. But then, what does it mean for us if, fill in the blank and all those fears that are associated with letting go of, some of that control. It's like, yeah, it is interesting and it's hard to see like what that means about yourself and like what your worthiness is or whatever, like you said, those core belief systems are.
I like that you said that too, because that's a pattern that I see as well, that it's like we have such high expectations for ourselves that like, but we would never put somebody else in that situation, right? Or have those beliefs or those expectations of them. And yeah, perfectionism.
For sure. And I know we were just like talking about this before we started recording that like you shared some of your artwork, I'm assuming from undergrad, and your thesis or whatever your portfolio was, and a lot of it seemed to be around body image and things like diet culture. So how do you feel like being able to express yourself through your artwork or as an artist helped with your recovery as well?
Always kind of intuitively used art as like a coping skill, like therapeutically. Like I've always enjoyed art ever since I was little. Loved grade school. I got to arts therapy. I had a cool teacher, 11th grade English teacher. We were doing a research paper. I was like, I don't know what to write about. And she's like, well, have you heard of art therapy? Like, you like art and you're taking psychology classes. Like, have you heard of art therapy? And I was like, no. So that's kind of where that first came into play for me. And it's levels of like the self-expression and stuff through art to deal with some of the inner workings. And so when I went to college, I was like, trying things out, and I knew I wanted to do like be a therapist, be a counselor. And I quickly realized I missed art a lot. Like it was minoring in it, and it just was, for me, it didn't feel like it was like enough. So I ended up double majoring in psych and art. And so my senior art thesis was on, just expectations of women and beauty standards and, the policing of women's bodies. And so for me, it was kind of taking this, like, which was before, it was like, I was using art as a means of kind of coping, like fun and enjoyable. Like, I think I'm explaining that correctly. And then I kind of took the art and took the creative process into more of a like, well, let's look at the issues itself and really like dive into that and see what comes out. And so some of still my favorite pieces to this day, that just that kind of reflected like what it felt like to be a young 20-something-year-old, and even when I was younger too, like teenager, experiencing disordered eating and mental health stuff just in general, but specifically the disordered eating aspect.
For sure. I think it's interesting too, like as like obviously I'm an art therapist too, and that self-expression, because I guess you would say like my portfolio, what I submitted when I was taking like AP, like studio art classes in high school, was about beauty standards for women. And I was doing a lot of pieces about like, Barbie, like before it was what it is now, and things from, like 2000s magazines and all of those beauty standards. But there were these two pieces that came up on, I guess, like, I don't know, on Facebook, when it's like, 10, 12, whatever years ago. And there were like these portraits I did, like these really dark charcoal portraits. And I had like words filling the face of them. And it was all surrounding appearance, like things that people would have been called if they were bullied, if they were like, fat, like all these like, I guess, these terms that had like negative connotations. And part of me is like, okay, this is like dark, but because I was probably like 16,
Mhm.
17, and it is sad to look at. Like, it's good because I was able to express myself, but I'm also like, why did nobody say anything to me? Like, no teacher, no one in my family, and I know like the education behind it, but it's like, okay, 10, 12 years later, yes, I'm like
Mhm.
recovering, but I feel like it could have been such an earlier conversation and no one ever talked about it.
I think too, like you're saying, just that educational piece, right? And that stigma, and also our society of like diet culture and obsessive exercising as like good or, super
Mhm.
healthy, right? So um in some of those ways, yeah. And again, like you're saying too, I look back at some of my pieces and I'm like, ooh, and just not recognizing. And yeah, it's interesting. It's um how that plays out. And I think too, looking back at it from like, oh, like looking at those old pieces being like,
Yeah, sure. And that's where, like, as an art therapist, I think people, think we're like analyzing your work, which part of the things, like, we're looking for symbols and other things, like a huge part is your narrative.
mhm,
So, but knowing my narrative at the time, like knowing that I was always struggling with these feelings of body image and things like that. But it is interesting because I have one client I'm thinking of in particular, but a few clients who are my art therapy clients and really express themselves through their artwork with their eating disorder
mhm,
work. And one of my clients she just got out of middle school, but she was making a piece like about recovering from her eating disorder, and yeah, it was pretty deep. And she felt very dismissed by her school. Pretty much the art teacher was like, this is concerning, and referred her to a counselor. I don't think either of them handled the situation from a trauma informed
right.
lens, where like I know they meant well and they weren't qualified to handle certain things, but my client ended up just feeling like she did something
Oh,
wrong and was very dismissed and like didn't really want to work on it in that
oh,
setting anymore,
yeah,
which was really discouraging.
yeah,
So I think, that there really should be, especially around creativity, like writing, artwork, things like that, a huge form of expression. There
yes,
should be more education
completely.
on things like this.
Yeah, yeah, right. And oh, for that client, just to have to be probably feeling like, oh, here's this container for these feelings, right? And here's the
Mm-hmm.
space for me to let it out. And then it feels like almost punitive is the word I'm looking for, but like just not
Yeah.
allowed, and like the bar, like that space got taken away. Like when, like you're saying, it could have been such a great spot, or like outside of her relationship with you, to continue to kind of explore those things. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah. So besides your artwork, like, and you mentioned some therapy, like what else do you feel like has been beneficial or the most beneficial to contributing to your recovery from your eating disorder?
I think I did, interestingly, after grad school. Um, it's about 3 years ago. Wow, that's funny. I went into a course where I was like a participant. It was like a group course. I really feel like that completely changed the game, like in terms of
Mm-hmm.
just again really addressing those like rules and beliefs about self. And it gave me such a great platform to do so. Like the rules and all the exercise rules and all of that stuff that had no foundation or grounding, but just because that's what I thought or what society told me I thought should
Mm-hmm.
think. Intuitive eating and just that practice not only has been so great for like the thoughts and how my relationship with my body, right? Because I think for such a long time it was so disconnected for reasons that
Mm.
it really started to bridge a gap that was there and had me start like noticing like hunger cues, and that means I should eat, right? Because the disordered part of my brain's like, oh, yay.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, no, you're hungry, you need to eat. Your body's telling you, like, and it was so kind of start to have my body trust me again and really like send me those cues and let me know that of what. Also food becoming a little bit more fun again, like what textures do I like, what flavors do I like what is
Yeah, for sure.
satiating. Opened up a really whole making movement safe again. Like exercise was such a punitive, punishing experience for me that I had kind of like really kind of shut it all off because I was afraid to like tap back into that.
Yeah.
But the food and stuff, it kind of helped me start listening to my body with like what's fun movement wise now.
I love that. I've, had very similar experiences with intuitive eating, and like I share in my story a lot that I think one of like the intuitive eating group that I participated in as a client was one of the things that like completely shifted my focus. And the movement piece is really interesting because it is correlated with diet culture so much. And I think I'm finally getting to the point where I think that was one of the longest things for me to get a hold of. And I was just talking to, I have a consultant, like as I'm pursuing my certification in like an eating disorder specialist, like we were saying that when people are at higher level of care, which for totally, good reasons, they need to gain weight, they need to get healthy or certain things, like exercise, you can't do really any movement, but it's really, I feel like almost does a disservice when people, they're like out back in the world and then they don't feel equipped to handle it. So that is something I talk to a lot of my clients about, and that's like a struggle as well, transitioning back into movement at all.
It almost becomes like, for me, like sometimes the fear shifted to like this, I don't want to go backwards. So like I'm almost afraid to even like tap into some of that, like whether it was the food stuff, movement stuff, navigate this, I don't know. But yeah, the intuitive eating, I kind of started translating it to like intuitive movement. Like I started really kind of like paralleling the two, and I think that was helpful because movement can be such a scary piece for so many reasons within like the and just wanting to figure out what was healthy for me took a while. And I feel like that, like you said, a common thing for people.
Yeah, for sure. I'm wondering too if we could take some time to talk about. So I know you are engaged. Congratulations. And just, I thought it would be interesting to talk about, just because I've also had recent experience. Like I'm recently married, and I think, as I was saying earlier, you go through recovery and then there's things that pop up and you're like, oh, okay, like I'm doing great. And then, okay. Because for me, I remember, and I think I spoke about this in a previous episode, but when I got engaged, we were kind of debating because of the timing of the year. It's like, okay, we could get married in 6 months, or we could get married in like a year and a half. And I went into panic mode when we were looking at 6 months because my brain was like, okay, I need to start trying on dresses, and I'm not going to like how I look in any of them, and I need to lose weight. And I just really had to take a moment of pause and be like, okay, there's a lot still going on. So I was just wondering what your experience was like having, a lot of events and things based on your appearance and how you navigated that through your recovery.
Sharing your personal experience, and just you bring up such a great point. I think that there was a part of me that kind of went right back to how like teen Meg felt like right before dances, like if the dance was coming up and there was going to be pictures, like it was like, and it's really a fight, like battle those thoughts and try to like curve them when they do pop up, because it's hard, right? Like like you said, like, oh my gosh, I have to wear a dress, and my brain wants to go, well, what size is the dress? Like, can I, like it goes into all of that, and just the disordered thoughts that pop up with it, has been challenged for me. as well, one of and probably I've really been tackling it and challenging it within the past like 2 years, was using pictures as a measure for myself, and noticing that, like you said, this is an event coming up that's a lot about appearance and taking pictures, like engagement photos, rehearsal dinner, the pictures at the wedding, right? Pictures of the bachelorette, the trying on the dress, the all of that. It's overwhelming, and so it's definitely been something for me where I've realized how important maintaining therapy is. Being open and honest with my therapist about like, hey, this is like really fun. Their exposures or coping skills or things like that, because yeah, it's been probably one of the harder things in the past like few years that's really piqued some of the thoughts. And I don't know if you this, but actually I watched a video where you were talking about something similar about how like the people around you that aren't necessarily in recovery talk a lot about like shredding for the wedding, right? Like, I can't eat that, like me and my fiance, and I'm like, to take deep breaths, and that A, not necessarily business in some of those cases to say what I'm thinking, and B, that's not my journey anymore, and that's not my experience, and I'm working on what's healthy for me. But yeah, it's been probably one of the harder parts in the past few years in terms of my eating disorder recovery.
I think it brings up a lot. Like there's, a few of my friends and people I know are like newly engaged or recently married, and we kind of have these discussions, and it is sad because it's something that should be such a like joyful, memorative like time in your life, but I feel like for women specifically, obviously men struggle with things with body image, but there's so much, attention around like the bride and the dress and all these things where almost like your husband's kind of like the extra or like your partner, depending on like who it is. And so it is sad. Like, and I think it kind of challenges those notions. And for me, it took a lot of like open communication because, and like you said, like with my therapist, like I know my triggers. Some of my triggers are people commenting on my body. So the whole trying on the dress was a huge thing. Like, I love my family, but there's a lot of strong personalities who are very opinionated. So I like did this thing before where I told my two sisters like how nervous I was. And I was like, if there are any opinions that aren't asked for, like I need you to shut them down. And they were super supportive. It ended up being a really great experience for me. And I definitely like worked myself up more than I needed to, and everyone was very supportive. But I think also just communicating that beforehand kind of gave me like some peace of mind as well. So
completely.
Yeah.
And I think too, what's also been, it's been such a balance of it being really hard and also taking to be really thankful for the progress and process of recovery that I've come to, because I think, and I'm sure you probably feel this way too, like if I hadn't done the work or, gotten there, like this could have been a really dangerous time for me. And it still is, it's still hard, right? But part of me that's really just thankful and grateful and can see my growth of like, I'm not giving into the urges, right? And everything, which I think is a benefit of recovery and having the support systems and everything. It helps. It's hard and it helps.
And I think, like what's helped me, and I think, these specifically women who want to like lose so much weight prior to and kind of put themselves through the extremes and be miserable. It's like your partner obviously like loves you. And, I think conversations I had with my fiance at the time, like, he's like, why do you want to be anybody but you, like at the wedding? And, I think it's hard to sit with, but it is true. It's like, why am I mean, obviously we know why,
Right.
all the things behind it, but really like sitting through that discomfort
Yeah.
and just being okay with like how you are right now.
Yep.
And all those insecurities that come along with it.
Definitely.
But I will say, so when is
First, second.
so that's exciting
very.
coming up. I know how stressful it can be, so I hope you're still like enjoying yourself and excited. And something I was so worried about the photos and being self-conscious and not liking how it was going to look. And truly I can say I had such a great day and such like a wonderful time with my partner and my family and all my loved ones that like I loved my photos and how everything turned out, and my body was like the last thing I was looking at, which for me is a huge step.
Right.
So, I really hope, you have a similar experience, but also like don't be too worried. If you're in the moment, I'm sure you'll enjoy it. So I just wanted to see like if there was someone who is interested in addressing these issues with diet culture, disordered eating in their body, or is kind of new to recovery, like what advice would you give them?
That's amazing and awesome. Just admitting it and recognizing that there's something there that you want to look at and work on. Really finding, again, just can afford, right? Because I think I shared earlier that I work at the community free clinic, so we see adults who don't have insurance. So a big part of my brain now is like the access to healthcare and the access to care can be a hard part too. And so part of me is like, yep, obviously therapy is great and amazing, and if that's something that you're struggling with, like there's these podcasts, right? There's audiobooks, there's things like that that can maybe help get the wheels turning. Just that, and that it's hard and it's scary, and it's also rewarding in the long run, and that a long process. It's healing's not linear. There's a lot of things that come up, like we were just talking about, kind of having things in a place, and then wedding, it's like, oh, okay, there's stuff for me still to work. And that's just part of the process, right? Like you don't know what you don't know till it happens. And I think the big thing for me that when I was early on was the of being perfect and like I have to do this the right way. I have to do this, da 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 da. And I think for me, recognizing that in some instances, again, like I said earlier, healing's not linear, but also that part of recovery, and obviously that's not what we want, but also don't completely beat yourself up and throw everything out the window if it does happen. That was something that I had to learn.
For sure. Providing yourself grace is really important. So
yeah, definitely.
So thank you so much, Meg, for taking the time. I really, really appreciate you coming on, and I value the conversation. Hopefully we can keep this going with our own circle and clients and all different things.
I've enjoyed this conversation as well.
So thank you everybody for tuning in, and keep your eye out for next month's episode, releasing at the 1st of every month. Thank you guys.